hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Good. Actually, it seems quite loud. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Glad you made it here. Sorry for my tardiness. I'll blame it on the time change, although that's probably not really the reason. But let's go ahead and start off with a prayer this morning. Lord, we're grateful that we could be here on just an absolutely beautiful morning with the sun shining. And we pray that as we come into this building, we have joy in our hearts, not that's related to our present circumstances, whatever they may be, but because we are in the presence of such a wonderful church family. And we just thank you for each person here. We thank you for your servant Paul and the message that he gives us in his letter to the Thessalonians, and we just pray that we will learn from his example, just as they did, that we will have his boldness, his passion, his humility, his care for everyone that's around us. Lord, just open our minds to the scriptures today. We pray these things to your Son. Amen. Okay, so chapter 1. Dan, can you turn me down just a little bit? Can you turn me down just a little bit? Do I sound too loud? I sound too loud in my own ears, but if anybody needs it louder, let me know. So the first chapter was really this very encouraging message from Paul to the people in the church in Thessalonica. He was grateful for them. He was constantly remembering them in his prayers. He was just really building them up in this first chapter, and a lot of it didn't seem contrived. I mean, I don't think any of it was contrived at all, but he was genuinely thankful for these people. Sometimes we go out of our way to encourage someone because maybe we feel like they could be doing much better. We want to encourage them because they're not measuring up. It seems like this just poured from his heart, that he was so thankful for each one of these people that he had to tell them. You can tell he truly loved this group of people. So chapter 2 kind of changes a bit, and we'll see what that's about. So we're going to do the first 12 verses of chapter 2. So let's start out with 1 through the first part of 6. You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know. But with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God who tests our heart. You know we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else. Even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. And that kind of goes with the next section too. But when I read this, it's almost like Paul is answering a question that we don't have asked, if that makes sense. He's talking to people who obviously know the situation. They know what happened, and so now it seems like he's addressing maybe some criticism, maybe some doubt as to his intentions for the ministry that he had in Thessalonica. He switches, and it kind of sounds a little bit defensive to me. He is answering some things. So in verse 1, he says, you know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. What were these results that he was referring to, you think? what results did he have from his ministry in Thessalonica?
Well, for one thing, he had converts there, and the church was established.
Yeah, he wasn't there very long, and yet there were converts. From chapter 1, we can see that these were pretty strong converts. He was very proud of their progression thus far. There had definitely been some results there. Faithful Christians changed lives in the end of chapter 1, when he is complimenting them on the things that he's hearing back from all of these other churches, right? He's not just hearing it back from other people in Thessalonica. He's hearing it from other churches, that the word has spread about these believers in Thessalonica and their changed lives. In verse 8 of chapter 1, the Lord's message rang out from you not only in Macedonia and Achaia. Your faith in God has become known everywhere. Therefore, we do not need to say anything about it, for they themselves report what kind of reception you gave us. They tell how you turned from God to idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who rescues us from the coming wrath. So these were people that had changed lives, and they were pretty dramatically changed. They weren't just gaining a further knowledge of Christ. They were moving from idolatry, from paganism. I mean, certainly not all of them. There was a mix in this church of Jewish converts, of Gentile God-fearers, but the culture around them was very pagan. A lot of different types of religions, and so they had turned completely from these things, their idolatry, and were following God. So that was definitely that there were results that were there. So then when he says, I guess the question is why? Why would he be bringing this up? If they know it, why is he choosing now to reinforce that there were these results? Any thoughts?
Probably somebody's claiming otherwise.
Okay. Yeah.
Opposition there, the Jewish folks didn't like what was going on, so they were going to continue their propaganda,
Right.
whatever, to try to destroy what's going on.
Yeah, there was a lot of opposition in Thessalonica. We have to remember, what does Acts tell us about Paul, Silas, and Timothy's time in Thessalonica? It was full of opposition, right?
Those two were only there for maybe a month, 3 to 4 weeks, and then they were basically moved out of town.
Right. They got ran out of town. They preached for 3 Sabbaths, and they were having success. And their success is probably what led to a lot of this opposition, because it was the Jews that raised these problems. They went and it said that they found some bad characters or whatever in the marketplace. So they knew who to align themselves with in order to cause trouble. Maybe indirectly, maybe they didn't have the courage to confront them directly. So they'll pull in whoever they can to start trouble. So yeah, they got ran out of town. So we can't think that opposition stopped when Paul and Timothy and Silas, when they were run out of town. This was the environment that this Thessalonian church was living in. And they were new converts. I'm sure that that Paul was extremely worried about all of the churches that he had to leave, because these were just, babies in the faith. How are they going to be able to stand up against this sort of opposition, which could have been coming from all around, from the Jewish side. It was probably coming from a lot of people in their families. There was a lot of pressure on these new Christians. So it seems like that Paul is addressing some accusations that may be accusations or maybe doubt. I think we get into more accusations as we go through here, but doubt that there was any real change done in these people's lives. Whether or not that was all external, whether it was just the critics, the Jews externally saying, they didn't really produce anything here. These people's lives aren't changed. Or whether Paul was trying to reinforce if there was any sort of internal doubt in these Thessalonian Christians of the change that had happened in their lives. He said, you really were changed. There were results. This was not just done in vain. Verse 2. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know. But with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. So how do you think that strengthens, or does it strengthen the statement in verse 1, where he's addressing this idea of results? Yes, Andy.
Mine, at the end of verse 1, mine says, you know, our visit to you is not a failure. And so part of that not being a failure is the fact that they had been treated so badly in Philippi that they came there, and those people treated them wonderfully and encouraged them. And so they, they still have these people welcome.
Okay. Yeah. And they still faced opposition. I think yes, he had a special affection for this group of Christians. No doubt, we can hear that in what he says. But I think the fact that the gospel message was even preached, meant that it was not a failure. Right? I mean, we can measure results in a lot of different ways. And Paul certainly wanted converts. But his primary goal was to preach the word of God. And it was a success whenever he could do that, regardless of what the reception was, regardless of what the quote unquote results were. It was a success. Just that he could make it out of Philippi and get to Thessalonica and be able to preach the word. Seems like I had another thought about that, and then it left me. If it comes back, I'll let you know. All right, verses 3 through 6. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our heart. You know we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else. Even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. So this word appeal that he uses in verse 3, for the appeal we make. And I haven't done a full word study here, but make is present tense. Like he's going to continue to make this same appeal, I believe, to not just these people, but everywhere he goes. This is the appeal that he makes. The word appeal can also be translated exhortation, encouragement, has to do with preaching and proclamation. That's the appeal. But it's kind of this urging, this pleading. It's not just throwing it out there and, hey, take it or leave it. The appeal that Paul has is really, really trying to convince people to please take this message seriously. You need this in your life. And it's a call for response. It's not just an acknowledgement. It's not just that they should have this information that he's trying to give them, but it requires something from them. There's a response. There's an action that comes from this appeal that he is making when he preaches the gospel to them. Yeah, Grace. It happened nearly everywhere he went. Yes, and it was primarily the Jews that would run them out, because typically they would go to the synagogue whenever he got into town. Here's my audience. Wasn't just the Jews; it was a lot of the God-fearing Greeks as well, or Gentiles who would have been there, but especially after they started to get some success, then the Jews, they couldn't handle that, and so they would run them out. There were very few places where he did not suffer persecution, getting run out of town, nearly stoned, actually stoned. In Philippi, they were beaten and jailed. So, everywhere they went, they were facing this persecution, harsh persecution. Okay, so this appeal, and he starts to talk about his motivation. For the appeal we make does not spring from, and then he gives this long list, which again, it seems like he is addressing each one of these almost like it's a list. Like Paul has heard, okay, here's what my critics are saying to you guys. And he's going to go through and he's going to remind them of what he did and why he did it, and that they saw his actions, which proved his motivations. But he's not going through here and saying, here's what my motivations were. He's going through and saying, these are what my motivations were not, which to me tells me he's answering directly for these criticisms that have been brought up. Like, you've heard it said this? No, it's this. You've heard it said this? No, it's this. Okay, so there's a long list here. So starting there in verse 3, throw out some of these false motivations that, and not the definition of them, just right now, just the list. What's he saying? Okay, error, impure motives, trickery. Okay, deceit. Trying to please people.
Being
Greedy. Flattery. And I've got one more.
Basically, look good in public or look good when look themselves up.
Yeah, praise. Yep. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty long, specific list, and he's going to address each one of these. So error. What would error mean? For the appeal we make does not spring from error. Tony.
I'm going to guess that the complaints are coming from Judaizers. And I'm going to guess
Yeah, so an error in doctrine. And that could be from a number of different, so Tony brings up the Judaizers, who would have been Christian, but would have been leaning on their Jewish traditions and wanting to hold all new Christians to that standard. So the men must be circumcised. You have to obey all the, ritual cleanliness, the observance of festivals, all those things. You need to be Jewish Christian. You have to adhere to all of those things. So that's kind of an internal pressure that we see definitely happen in a lot of these churches. Nancy?
Maybe just the error of preaching Jesus as the Messiah, the gospel.
Right.
He's saying he didn't, it wasn't because they were mistaken.
Right. We are not wrong in this. Yes, the Jews, on the other hand, that didn't want anything to do with Christianity, would say, this is blasphemous. This is not a proper doctrine. And I think even when we look, when Paul's preaching in Athens, the people there, who obviously were not Jews who were addressing him, were like, what is this babble these guys are talking about? They're delusional. Their doctrine is completely erroneous. It's incorrect. So he's saying, nope, we are not wrong. We are in our right minds. This is correct teaching.
I think the point there is too is that those that were opposing him and speaking of something differently, they were out for personal gain. They were trying to get something for themselves. He's not. He's being opposed by it, threatened.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thought that most of the people that were bringing these accusations against Paul had bad motivations themselves. We certainly see that from the Jews. We were talking about envy last week, and Pilate knew that the Jewish leaders wanted to kill Jesus because of their own self-interests, right? So that was definitely a motivation for some of these people who were opposing Paul in this way. Okay, so we have error. The next one we have is impure motives. What could that one be?
I think there was probably, you've got the Jews that were obviously in opposition. We hear that, but there could have been, we see from other places, other people going around trying to, they realize, hey, I can make some money doing this, I can get supported, and so, they were kind of doing things too. So those people were out there too that needed to be dealt with, because they were trying to, so it was easy for the Jews to, it could be one of these false people over here making an association. Doesn't have to be, they're not doing a lot of fact checking, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right.
They can just throw these things out. Sounds good because they knew of other people that were doing this sort of thing too.
Right. Yeah, it was not unusual for people to travel from town to town preaching something. There were so many religions in this area. It was kind of the crossroads of trade and commerce in this part of the world, an important port city, and a lot going on. And so there was you had the mythical religions of the Greeks. You had the Romans and their gods. You had the Romans who promoted Caesar worship and deifying the political leaders at the time. And there were just other charlatans that went from place to place, talking a good game, selling snake oil, whatever, and profiting off of it. Yeah, you can probably put all of those things into impure motives. It's pretty broad ranging. If we wanted to be more specific, and I don't know if this is the case, but they also could have been accusing Paul of using his influence and this message for impure sexual means, which is certainly not unheard of, right? How many times have we heard of situations where pastors or cult leaders or whoever use their influence, and that's one of their primary motivations, is impure sexual relations. That very well could have been something that people were accusing him of. Obviously completely baseless, but as Eric said, they don't have to fact check necessarily. They just have to cast doubt. So he wasn't there on any sort of impure motive. Next one, trickery, to mislead, to manipulate. Again, that would have to be for some other form of gain. You know, where I'm not telling you a message and then changing something up to try to manipulate you.
Another thing about trickery could have been he did a lot of healing, and maybe they thought that they were just somebody was saying that he's just charlatan. They really weren't sticking him. Like we say today, if we see something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sandy. The signs that were able to be produced, whether it was healings or miraculous escapes from jail, whatever. That wasn't really God doing that. That was simply trickery. Next one, trying to please people. Let's see. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our heart. Yeah, and he certainly wasn't preaching a message that was easy, right? This required something from people to change their lives. He wasn't dumbing this down and just trying to tell people what they wanted to hear at all. He never diluted the message. Paul changed his tactics in order to, tactics sounds kind of bad, but he changed his methods to reach people where they were, but he never diluted the message of God and of Christ and him crucified. Flattery. So he wasn't coming in and building people up unnecessarily. Chapter 1, he gave a lot of encouragement, but it wasn't flattery. Flattery has this negative aspect that I'm going to build this person up so that I can then manipulate them somehow. I'm going to overemphasize some characteristics in them to flatter them. That wasn't his tactic. He didn't use that tactic.
I was wondering too if, and I don't know if I can explain this right, but in the one that you just said before about pleasing God,
Pleasing people.
the Jewish people were living by a set of rigid rules that had to be done, and they knew they couldn't do them. But here is Paul coming and saying, God loves you. He's preaching about Jesus who died for you, who's giving you a way that you don't have to do all that stuff. So in a way, he is making them feel good, making them feel better about themselves because they know they can't keep the rules. And the Jewish people could just be saying, oh, you gotta keep those rules. He's just trying to make you feel good.
Yeah, it's a good thought. Yeah, the Jews would have thought that he was lowering the bar. You're going to make it easy for these people. No, they need to do all these things, and that would be both the Jews and the Judaizers, both with that very legalistic mindset of these are the things that have to happen. Yeah, good point, Sandy.
Also,
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily an intentional thing. You know, he wasn't being gratuitous with the words that he used or whatever. But the message of God really did fly in the face of culture and how people were living. And yeah, he was not going to shy away from that conflict and telling people what they needed to do. All right, the next one is greed, and I would think that would be one of the most prevalent motivations for people to falsely preach some message, this message of greed, just for financial gain. He says it wasn't for that. And the final one was praise. We were not looking for praise from people. I mean, a lot of these you look at, and maybe we know something that they didn't know, but I don't think so. Certainly the Thessalonians knew Paul's story. He knew what they had just come from in Philippi, what they had experienced in all of the other churches as they moved through those areas, all of the persecution that was there. If they were trying to please people, they were doing a very bad job of it, right? Some of these motivations just don't hold up unless you go to the first one that says that they were in error and you believe that Paul was just completely delusional, right? He would have to be delusional to continue preaching this message that he knew was not that he knew was not true, and be treated the way that he was. Because what was he getting out of it other than stonings and beatings and persecution and imprisonment? That's what he was receiving for his preaching. And I think that's one of the things that convinces me overall that the gospel is true, that these eyewitnesses for Christ are true. All of these men basically went to their deaths saying, Jesus is the Christ. He was crucified. He was raised from the dead. They held on to this message. They all would have had to have been completely delusional to know that was not correct and continue to do it, because what they got out of it was, most of them, martyrdom. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think we're not there, but in verse 8, that's basically what he's saying. As I'm reading through this short section, how many times he mentions the word, the gospel. And that was the point, right? Like, every time he shared the good news, the gospel, like, he was facing these type of things. But I feel like even now, and I am guilty of this also, like, we all fear these things in a way, right? Like, we fear, maybe I don't share because someone's going to think that I'm just doing it to be holier than thou, or I'm going to get something out of it, or, I'm not really speaking truth. Like, I'm being deceitful, or I'm being trickerous. So he's naming all the things that I think are still relevant in what we fear in sharing the gospel, or maybe have even experienced. But I think it's so encouraging that he's saying it all, and yet he's still moving on forward, because it's all about sharing the gospel. Like,
Right.
he doesn't stop, and to the point where he says, our very own lives, because you were so dear to us.
Right. Yeah, he had one job, and that was to proclaim Christ wherever he went, and he was going to continue doing that regardless of what price he paid. And yeah, we can certainly, apply that to our lives, that there will always be people that question our motivation. What are you trying to? Because quite honestly, a lot of people have been tricked. A lot of people have experienced these sort of motivations from the people around them, and it's so.
Essentially telling them that that's what happened to them. The teachers
here's why we're different from everything else you've heard. Yeah, and there's clear differences, which he also talks more about. But I think it's a good point also that we need to check our own motivations. We need to make sure that our motivations are never on this list, that we're never preaching or teaching or just conversing with people erroneously. You know, if we're going to talk to people about Christ, we need to know what we're talking about. It doesn't mean we need to know everything, but we have to recognize maybe when we don't know something and say, you know what, I'm going to study that some more before I go spouting off about what I think. You know, and then just our motives. You know, whether it's just talking to somebody one-on-one or whether it's something more public. You know, I have to question myself when I get up here to teach. What's my purpose? Am I trying to just you know, share God's message, or am I trying to look good? Am I trying to be impressive? Am I trying to, you know? I guess I could use that same argument that if I'm trying to be impressive, I'm probably failing. But what is my motivation? We all have to question our motivation. It is not a bad thing to do that, to make sure that we are doing things for the right reason.
And Scott, I think Satan knows that, and Satan is always putting those bug things in your head and in your ears that is trying to pull you back into thinking that way.
Yeah. Satan is always working on you, on your doubts, on your insecurities, just those little things. He doesn't have to get you to believe in him and worship him. He just has to get us slightly off track.
And he was probably doing it to those people in Thessalonica too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure Paul had that worry about every church that he left of, they're going to be influenced, because he knew that was going to happen. I think without a doubt, you know, which I'm sure was the most frustrating for him to know that the Judaizers, these people that believed in Christ, were doing some of the worst damage to these churches and these young Christians. That it was happening internally. It wasn't just this external threat. All right. Well, that was the second bell. We'll get into some of this next week, because he then flips it and gives the opposite. Like, it's not because of error, it's because of this. So he starts to address some of these things and remind the Thessalonians of what his time was like when he was there, what they saw with their own eyes, to believe their experience, not to be influenced by all these other things, these messages that are coming at them from outside. So, great. Thank you, guys.